I've talked quite a lot on the channel about why I don't like supported accommodation, and it's not just me whinging about stuff and kind of getting stuff off my chest. It's because I have worked in the supported accommodation sector and around the supported accommodation sector for many, many years, and I just see so many people being harmed by it. So I thought I'd kind of introduce another reason why I think that the model itself is fundamentally flawed. And I'm going to use an analogy which takes me back to school, and I guess most people have got teachers that they remember because they were particularly interesting and particularly enthusiastic. And this particular teacher was a biology teacher and was telling us about bacteria and kind of the development of doctors and medicine and stuff like that, and hospitals. And he was explaining how there was a time when doctors basically would travel around, the kind of villages and treat people in their own homes for whatever sickness they had. And yes, the treatments were often ridiculous, kind of drinking your own urine and stuff like that. But as medicine developed and as it became kind of more of a recognised thing, and as kind of, faith healers became less of a thing, someone had a great idea to say, well, do you know what? Doctors are spending a lot of time here travelling around the country and it's very inefficient. Wouldn't it be better to build somewhere where you can bring sick people to, and then the doctor can basically treat everyone in the same place? And the teacher basically asked us, what do you think happened to death rates? And, we're kids, we're 14, 15 or whatever. We just kind of heard that medicine's a good thing and kind of doctors, hospitals are a good thing. So we all kind of said, death rates must have gone down, right? And the teacher was like, no, the death rates actually went through the roof. Death rates went up by about 4 or 5 fold. And it was because you were bringing lots of people with different illnesses into one place, which were, mainly contagious, and then treating them with kind of, unclean scalpels and stuff like that. And obviously they caught each other's illnesses and died a lot of the time. And the analogy I see in this for the supported accommodation sector is we have the same kind of mentality that underpins it. We think that floating support is too inefficient. It takes too much time to kind of deal with everyone as an individual, to have individual meetings. Wouldn't it be better to bring them all into one building? And so we can have these support workers which are going to fix them and kind of send them off into the world, much better for it. And I would consider, and again you might disagree with me about this, but I'd consider things like heroin use and other drug use to be in one sense contagious. That is to say, if you put lots of people into a building who don't use heroin, then you introduce a few people who do, before you know it you've got multiple people using heroin. So I think it's fair to think of drug use as being contagious in a sense. Obviously it's not kind of bacteria and stuff, but just kind of putting people all into one building is going to lead to those kind of issues spiralling out. And I guess same things like criminality, you're going to get people committing crime who have never committed crime before because they kind of get dragged along with it. And I'd also kind of take this maybe a bit further and say that things like hopelessness are also contagious. And that is to say that if you stick a bunch of people, a bunch of adults, in a supported accommodation provider unit which is run down, kind of staff are very badly trained and overworked and don't have enough time to do anything useful, you're going to get that kind of hopelessness that arises in that situation also kind of spreading out and kind of, getting more people basically. And I can think of many people. I can think of one person in particular. I've talked to him about him on the channel before actually. His dad basically kicked him out when he was 17 and to teach him a lesson. He ended up in the night shelter in Bedford, and within a couple of weeks he was using heroin and various other drugs that kind of people were given to him. In fact, I remember a particularly bad time when he was given buprenorphine to snort whilst kind of high and stuff, which had a tremendously bad reaction and all the rest of it. And he was still 17 years old when that happened. And when I last saw him, which was a few years ago now, he definitely looked like he was still using. So I would have argued that had he never gone to that night shelter environment, he would have been much better for it. And so when you hear success stories coming out of charities, you don't hear the full story. You hear the kind of, they cherry pick the best cases. Often there's a real kind of nasty power dynamic when they're asking people for their feedback, because in one sense they're still got power over them. They're still the landlord or whatever, and they'll kind of frog march them out and get them to tell their story and kind of say how great the charity is and how the charity's rescued them. I've known a lot of people who've been in that situation and then years later really kind of resent being treated like that. So that's why, as I say, that's why I kind of have a pop at supported accommodation quite a bit, because it's also very expensive, but that's a whole other story. But bringing people together with similar issues, and they're in a very bad situation, into one place is going to cause more problems than it solves. And this is maybe why one of the reasons why the housing first model is so successful, because one of the key features of pure housing first is that the accommodation is dispersed. You're not bringing people all into one place with similar issues. You're allowing them to remain in the community. And I've also heard it said by influential professionals that housing doesn't end homelessness, it's communities. And I'm going to talk more about that concept at some point soon. I fundamentally disagree with it. It's not that I'm saying that communities are bad, but I certainly don't think that charities can create communities very easily, because you're paid to be there. If you're a charity, you're paid to be there, and it's not a real friend. You can't build real friendships in that way in a lot of situations. Co-production is another potential solution to that. But I've seen organisations, in fact, I remember an organisation in Bedford called Onward, and they would have the most ridiculously successful outcomes. There was a small team, 2.5 full-time equivalents, and they would go and visit people in the homes. They'd be incredibly flexible. That seemed to me, although they only had small caseloads, like 10 or whatever, they were incredibly successful at getting people into accommodation in the first place and then helping them sustain it down the line. And part of the reason that was successful was that people were in suitable accommodation, and they'd have a worker turn up once or twice a week or whatever, or whenever needed, to help them with any kind of issues that had come up. That was a much better option to do. Unfortunately, you don't get housing benefit for that, and unfortunately a lot of the strategies you see within the homelessness sector are basically tied to what you get money for. So that's, again, potentially, if you want to change the supported accommodation system, you need to change the way it's funded and what's funded, what kind of work is actually valued. Because at the moment, it's actually very easy to make millions of pounds by having effectively HMO accommodation and saying it's supported, going in, popping your head in once a month or something like that, and saying that you've had support sessions. And you get paid a staggering amount of money for that. It costs the local authority a lot of money as well, because many of those unregulated supported accommodation providers, you don't get the kind of full whack back from central government. You kind of have to pay out of your own purse as a council for those kind of services. And I'm sure many people who kind of bother watching these videos will have their own stories of how bad supported accommodation can be, ranging from just bad, kind of really poor practice, that sort of thing, right through to outrageous abuses happening within, under the nose of the charities that run them or the organisations that run them. But anyway, I just think that kind of idea of hospitals and kind of this idea of contagion certainly helps me kind of try and make sense of things. So I thought I'd just put it out there as well to see if it kind of helps anyone else, really. Again, for me, I would love to see the back of supported accommodation. Unfortunately, there's been a raft of funding announcements recently, 39 billion over X number of years, and unfortunately a lot of that's going to go down the throats of supported accommodation providers, who will continue to spin this yarn that it's a really effective way of working. As I say, I'm sure there are people it works for, but the vast majority, I'd say, having seen many people go through the system, come out of it worse for it rather than better. And there's a much better way. As I say, Housing First is a great way. Dispersed accommodations, homeless applications is a great way to actually secure that type of accommodation. So it's a real kind of key part of it. But supported accommodation, the number of people I know who've kind of lived there and basically hate its guts is quite remarkable, really. And it's a real kind of murky and kind of distasteful situation where charities are pushing the idea that it's all very good and everything's great and give us your money sort of thing. So yeah, you've got any opinions about this? I genuinely am up for learning stuff. So I'm over the years I've been quite good at listening to people who oppose my views, whatever. So if you think supported accommodation is great, I genuinely would like to hear what you've got to say about it, honestly, because I have changed my mind about many things over the years in response to kind of coherent points of view. Certainly I've kind of got to this point by listening to lots of people living in supported accommodation. That's kind of why I take the time to kind of criticise it, really. I guess it's probably maybe worth mentioning places like Emmaus, which, whilst they're called supported accommodation, that's a very different model. And if I was homeless and I had to move into supported accommodation, I'd move into Emmaus, because they get a lot of things right. It's kind of somewhere where you can, communities where you work and stuff, and yes, there's downsides to it, and yes, there's problems with it, but it's certainly nowhere near as bad and hopeless as some of the supported accommodation providers I know in Bedford, and kind of have known people to go through in Bedford, so, and elsewhere in the country as well. So yeah, as I say, I'm always kind of interested to put stuff out there just to hear what you have to say back, and I'm up for changing my mind about stuff. So please do, kind of say what you think, and I'm not gonna attack anyone for saying or disagreeing with me or anything like that.